The Formula 1 grid boasts 20 incredible drivers, but not all Formula 1 races are made equal. We've managed 12 out of 22 races this season, so it's time to reflect on the season so far and rank the drivers from worst to best. Number 21 in a 20-driver championship is never where you want to be, but I think we have to acknowledge Nick de Vries because AlphaTauri isn't. Coming into the season, there was a lot of hype around him, not only from the fans, but from Nick himself, and when you say things like, I don't want to be seen as a rookie, you really have to turn up. Which he didn't, so he's gone, but not forgotten. Of the drivers left on the grid, I've also been really disappointed by Magnussen this year. He had last year to get himself settled back into the Haas team and car and did relatively well outside constantly losing his front wing end plates on lap 1. However, this year, with a more experienced teammate alongside him, he really has exposed his flaws and he's been nowhere near the level that Haas actually need from him. So I don't think it helps that the car eats through its tyres like crazy, but at the same time, there have been many races this year where I've actually forgotten that Kevin is even taking part. I feel like it's tough to set expectations for Logan Sargent because he is a rookie, but also he's a rookie without the proposed pedigree of an Oscar Piastri or a Nick de Vries. Not only that, but his teammate, who we'll talk about later, isn't really a good comparison for him either due to the staggered upgrades and the experience gap between the two of them. Like, Albon has driven for many different teams on the grid. However, being the only driver that's taken part in 12 Grand Prix and not scored a point, considering that we've had some crazy races this season as well, it's disappointing and he needs a top 10 finish in the second half of the season for me. Next up is the current token Finn, Valtteri Bottas, who is a good driver and has multiple race victories behind him and was a core part of that Mercedes dominance era, even if he didn't win a championship, but maybe that's what Bottas is, an amazing sidekick. Because this season, when the pressure is really on him to stamp his authority on the Alfa Romeo team as they transition over the next few years, for me, he just hasn't delivered. The car isn't great, it's been very track dependent, but at the same time, Bottas hasn't shown to me that he's the driver the team can lean on in the future. And the same can be said about Zhou Guanyu, really. The reason I have him higher than his teammate, even if it is only by a singular place, is because my expectations for him are much lower, and he's pretty much matching his teammate more often than not. Zhou is often the most anonymous driver on the grid, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, like he isn't crashing the car or causing problems, but it isn't necessarily a good thing either, because apart from that P5 in qualifying in Hungary, he isn't doing anything spectacular. And even that P5 wasn't really talked about by the majority of Formula 1 outlets. So he's in the unfortunate situation where even if you do nothing wrong in Formula 1, you don't always hold on to your spot on the grid. So even though the talent is there, he definitely needs to make a step up soon. I feel like Lance has really missed the boat this season. At the start of the year, when Aston Martin were comfortably the second fastest package on the grid, it felt like he wasn't able to get the most out of the car and was nowhere near the level of his teammate, with Alonso picking up podium after podium, whereas Stroll has no trophies to take back to his mansion. And now I would say that he actually looks a little bit more comfortable in the car. The weekend expectations are so much lower, which means the gap between him and Alonso is just insane. Like, Stroll can almost see himself as lucky that the car has been a bit worse for a few races. Otherwise, that gap to Alonso would likely be even greater and even more embarrassing. Daniel Ricciardo is a difficult one to judge, considering he's only taken part in 2 races, and the first one was completely ruined by Zhou Guanyu ramming into the back of him. But I think the fact that he's been able to convince the Red Bull higher-ups that he deserves a shot in Formula 1 once again, he can come in and improve the team's fortunes, that has to be commended. So I've put Daniel Ricciardo in at 15th place because everyone lower than this I've been disappointed in, and everyone above this I think has been at least good for a few weekends. But Ricciardo's real challenge starts after the summer break. It seems weird to put the only other driver that's managed to win a Grand Prix other than Max Verstappen so far down on this list, but I couldn't really justify his place being any higher than 14th. Don't get me wrong, for the first 5 races he held his own, but the crash in Monaco, along with the upgrades to the RB19 not quite suiting his style, it's meant that he's lost all of his confidence. He missed out on Q3 5 times in a row. That left him with an average qualifying position of P9.8, and even though he's driven well in the races, he's missed out on way too many podiums for me. I'm hopeful that he'll bounce back, but when you have the best car on the grid, you kind of have to do better. Pierre's first races with Alpine have gone alright, but not great. I just feel like he's left a lot of points on the table, especially in Australia, where he had exceptional pace, keeping up with the Ferrari of Carlos Sainz. It was probably his best race until he smashed into his teammate off the restart. The one thing he really didn't need to do, especially with all the tension between him and Ocon coming into the season. He has settled in well though. He's been matching Ocon in terms of qualifying as their head-to-head is 6-6. So clearly he feels comfortable in the car when it's on the limit. He did manage a podium during the Spa sprint as well. He just needs a few more points finishes in the second half of the season and maybe try to close that points gap to his teammate as well. I know the George Russell zero pods merchant joke is still continuing the rounds, but I'm starting to believe it. Last year, George did manage to outscore Lewis, even if he didn't outperform him. So this year, we wanted to see him really step up and take the fight to his teammate, which hasn't happened, and the Mr. Consistency that we saw last year seems to be missing too. Like, just look at that crash in Canada where he hits the wall under pressure from nobody. After the updates, it's been clear that he hasn't quite been able to adapt, and whilst neither of the Mercedes drivers like the car still, his performances have been nowhere near Lewis's. Esteban Ocon has shown once again that he is one of the best midfield drivers on the grid. He does have the upper hand on Gasly in terms of experience in that Alpine car, yes, but he has also been able to put together the better of the performances, most notably that podium finish in Monaco, which will probably be the high of the season for Alpine. However, I wouldn't say that he's been as consistent as he normally is, with a few errors creeping in, like Bahrain, where he picked up enough penalties to last the whole season. I just don't really see it getting better for Alpine in the second half of the season after the entire backroom team left just before the break. So damage limitations will be key for the second half of the season. Moving into the top half and starting with Carlos Sainz, who's now in his third season with the Scuderia, I think I have to start by saying that he has driven well this year and has often been hovering around the podium positions without actually claiming one. He has that similar curse to what I said with Joe before of being consistent without ever being spectacular. If you look at Sainz's season, he hasn't had any massive low points, apart from maybe that restart in Australia, but he also hasn't had any crazy highs either, where he's pushing for a podium or slicing his way through the pack. He needs one amazing drive in the second half of the season, just to show that he has what it takes to dazzle the Ferrari fandom. Oh, Charles Leclerc, once again, I feel like we're reflecting on a half season where the Monash driver should be higher up in these rankings, but he's been incredibly unlucky and full of mistakes. He is quick, arguably the quickest driver given one lap in qualifying, but the weekends never seem to run smooth. You can blame the team for things like Bahrain, where his engine exploded, or Saudi Arabia, where he had to take a 10-place penalty one weekend into the season, but you can also blame him for the frequent connection with the barriers a la Miami. Similar to Sainz, when Ferrari can't get the tyre choice, strategy, or pit stops right, what can he really do? With 3 podiums so far this year, I think his main hope is that he just gets more after the break. Yuki, I think, has been great this year, to the extent that we started to see links to the main Red Bull team if Sergio Perez didn't step up his game. I think coming out of the shadow of Pierre Gasly and being the more experienced driver in the team when Nick came in has given him a real boost at the start of the season, and he does seem to start seasons really well. It's just a shame that you don't get any points for those 11th place finishes. His season has tailed off a little bit, however, but you do have to remember he's often in the worst car on the grid. The challenge now is keeping ahead of Daniel Ricciardo, as he will be a much tougher challenge than Nick de Vries, and Yuki is no longer the experienced driver of the team. Boring Nico Hulkenberg really isn't living up to expectations. Like, he has been scintillating to watch when it's come to qualifying in that Haas. We all know that Nico is quick. You don't hang around in Formula 1 for this long without being good, but he is taking this Hulkenback season to a whole new level and is proving without doubt that Haas not only made the right decision, but may need to look into getting rid of their other driver soon too. Like, he has come in and become the clear number one. The only thing is that since Australia, with the exception of Canada maybe, we haven't seen too much in the races, but I'm blaming that on the car more than Nico. There's a reason that Alex Albon has been linked to the likes of Ferrari recently, and it's because he is absolutely flying at Williams. He's been at the epicenter of this revitalization since the regulation change in 2022, and seems to have taken a really big step up this season. Although the Williams car and team is massively underdeveloped compared to the big boys, the defensive performances that Alex Albon has produced in that car have just been amazing to watch, and I think he's finally found his feet at a team where he's loved, and I cannot wait to see what he and James Vowles do next. I am so happy that the McLaren team has finally stepped up, because it's allowed us to once again see just how good Lando Norris is. I know it's not a secret, he's linked to every team on the grid whenever a space starts to open, but he always overperforms in whatever McLaren car he's in. Like, I think the drive that stands out to me so far this year is not the podium in Silverstone or Hungary, but the drive in Australia, where he delivered in what was a B-spec MCL 60. If the package is right for him in the second half of the season, I think he's one of very few drivers that could actually ruin Red Bull's perfect year. Well, he's not going to retire, is he? There's still a lot of fight left in Lewis this season, and he's showing once again this year why he's got so many world championships. The Mercedes car still isn't anywhere near the Red Bull, and Lewis still doesn't like the way that it drives, but I think we can all agree he's getting the most out of that car every single weekend. Since the radical redesign in Monaco, he's picked up 3 podium positions in 6 races, as well as a pole position in Hungary, and I don't think he could have gotten much more than that. He is driving exceptionally well. 12 races into his Formula 1 career and already one of the most exciting drivers on the grid that is right behind his teammate, who is seen as one of the best overall drivers out there. Just that qualifies Oscar being as high up on this list as he is. But when you add in the pressure to perform that he and the team put him under after everything that happened a year ago, and the fact that he's a Formula 2 champion, the fact that he's been able to shoulder that pressure and focus on his driving shows a mentality that a rookie just shouldn't have. And despite his inexperience, which has shown at times, he has been on the level of Norris and sometimes even outperformed him. I'll put it out there, Oscar Piastri is the real deal and will be discussed on the level of Charles Leclerc and George Russell within the next couple of seasons. It hasn't quite been the podium every race that Alonso threatened at the start of the season, but I feel like he has still had an incredible year in, let's not forget, what is a brand new team. The jump from Alpine to Aston Martin was questioned by many, but considering Alpine are basically on fire behind the scenes and Alonso is pushing for second in the Drivers' Championship, I think it worked out, which is great to say because it hasn't been the case for so many of the moves that he's done throughout his career. I think the only thing that this season is now missing for the Spaniard is that elusive 33rd win. The top of the tree in the championship and in my rankings is Max Verstappen. Could it realistically have been anybody else? 10 wins from 12 Grand Prix is absurd, and he's winning the constructor standings by himself, and he's making it look easy. Every race, it doesn't matter where he starts from, he finds his way to the front and then disappears into the distance to the extent that he's taking extra pit stops for fun. Like, I'm not a huge fan of Max, but I think we have to realize we're watching true greatness. We are witnessing like an incredible symbiotic relationship between driver and car that the sport has never really seen before, and in 10 races, he will have broken every record that there is. I'm sure that you would make some changes to the list, and I'd love to know who you'd put where in the comments down below. And if you've enjoyed this video, I also made this video here, which I think you'll absolutely love too. So click that link and I'll see you over there.